proof light in the sink. I spill that resin and I watch it blink. Cup full of glitter stuck to my sleeve. This little studio feels like make-believe. Camera on the tripod leaning like a tree. I talk to the lens like it's family.
Hi and welcome back to Georgie's Gorgeous Gifts. So as you've seen in the intro, we're going to be making our own little snowman created from 2 spheres. So I'm starting off with some Jesmonite. Now Jesmonite is very similar to Eco-Pour, but rather than water it comes with an acrylic base. So I've mixed up, it's a 3:1 ratio, so I've mixed up 300 grams of Jesmonite and just mixing up 100 grams of the acrylic liquid. It was slightly too much, so I've just poured it back into the pot. And then I mix the two together. Now do this by pouring the powder into the acrylic. This is just personal preference. You can do it the opposite way around, of course. But I prefer to put the powder into the liquid and make sure that there's no lumps in each bit. So I have sped this bit up for you because this did take quite a while. But I'm just making sure that there's no lumps in the mixture and it's like a pancake batter consistency. So I've got these 2 spheres. Now because I wanted a flat base on the one, I've decided to turn this sphere inside out so that it hasn't got that rounded bit on the bottom, and then we're going to pour the Jesmonite into each of these moulds. I then leave that to fully cure. Now Jesmonite usually takes about an hour or so, I'd say, to then be able to demould. That's my safe demoulding time. So I'm just pouring each one of these spheres right to the top. So we are going to have a flat base on this one, which is perfect because then we'll attach the 2 flat bases together. So one's the head and one's the body. So after filling up these 2 moulds, I give it a bit of a shake and a bit of a tap just to release any bubbles that might be within the mixture. And then I leave this to cure. You can see I'm just giving it a bit of a bash on the table. Very similar to Eco-Pour. And each time I'm giving it a bang, I'm then topping a little bit more up. I did have some left, so I did use it to pop inside this Christmas decoration. And we'll be backing this with a different colour once this is fully cured. Now, a lot of you may have already seen this mould. This is a TV box mould, but I want to use it as like a box frame. So I don't need the little stand bits on the bottom. So I'm using some polymer clay and just making it quite soft, and to be able to put them inside these little gaps so that when we fill the box with resin, the resin's not going to go into the feet. And if it does, it's going to make it a lot easier to be able to pull apart because the majority of it is still going to be polymer clay. There are a few other things that you can use to do this, but this is again my personal preference. So when I'm putting this in, I need to make sure that the inside is quite flat because the last thing we want is for the box to actually have the indents on the inside. So again, I'm just doing the opposite side, making it really pliable with my fingers. This is only cheap polymer clay, a pack of 64 I think I had off Amazon. I will try and link it in the description below if I can find it. And I'm just popping it inside these little gaps once again, just making sure that the inner bits are flat. Once I'm happy that these grooves are completely filled, I then mix my resin up with my dual electric mixer from Resiners and then pop it into my degassing machine. You can see there is still a few bubbles on the top of this, but I will be spraying some isopropyl alcohol just to get rid of them surface bubbles. So for this one I'm using some blue resin tint and just a generic one from Amazon, and I'm using some Starry Skies. At the time I didn't realise that it was UV ink, but it does look really nice in epoxy. So I'm just mixing in a couple of drops of the blue into some clear resin. The aim I'm going for this is to be like a snowflakey kind of blue. Now I was going to add some white into it, but I decided to add this Starry Skies into the mixture instead. So I combine the two once they are both thoroughly mixed, and you can see the blue shimmer in this is absolutely gorgeous. It's like an interference liquid rather than a powder. So just combining the two and giving that a good mix. once that is all thoroughly mixed, I'm then pouring it into the mould. Now I do pour at the one end because, again, I have said this previously on my channel, but where the resin meets is where you're likely to get air bubbles. So I'm trying to just pour in one spot and allowing the resin to meet at the middle of the opposite end. And it will fill in down by the grooves. You can see there is a slight gap, but I will have to sand that afterwards where the polymer clay is. But I'm just continuing to pour the resin, and you can see it's about to meet in the middle. So therefore we're only likely to have any air bubbles on the one side. And to try and stop that, I'm going to be using my stick just to go around all four edges. So I'm just topping this mould up all the way to the top. Now, this is quite a cool mould really when you use it as a TV stand, because it's great for creating little scenes within it. So we're just doing the front cover. Now at this point I wasn't sure how big I was going to do the snowman, and whether I was going to sand it down or make it a little bit smaller. So I didn't know whether I'd need this front piece, so I poured it anyway. So I'm just using some clear resin, but I was unsure whether I actually needed to pour around the outside edge or whether to fill the whole thing in, as I'd never used this front piece before. So I was unsure at how it would fit onto the front. So this is where it started to get messy, because as you can see here, there's like a little bulge, and it was really annoying me. There was one on the top and one on the bottom. So I attempted to try and close that gap and to make it flat. And I have sped this bit up for you, but you can see I tried to move the pieces around and the resin just went everywhere, all over the mat. And it's a good job that this G3 has a mat on the bottom, because yeah, the resin was just... yeah, I tried using a mould to try and prop it up, and this is how we ended up, with lots of sticks and wipes. So this is the following day and it is fully cured. I didn't end up putting this into my G3 machine, I just left it on the side overnight. But look at the overspill on this mat. But it's that easy to just pull off and clean up. Now these pieces I do keep, because I do use them as like a C pattern in coasters. So it's time to demould these, and I did in fact push these little bits up so that it made it square and didn't fill in the bottom bits, as you can see here. So when you've demoulded a piece like this, it needs to be kept flat in order to cure properly for a good, I'd say 48 hours at least, because if it's on a slight bend, it will in fact cure bendy, because they're not fully cured yet as this are thin. Same with this box. So I'm just turning my mould back the right way and then taking the polymer clay off the bottom of this piece. Now this did work, I did have to sand it a fair bit, but the polymer clay come off relatively easy, just a bit of a scrape with my nail. And rather than being a stand now with two legs, it's just a normal box, which is exactly what I wanted. So after pulling all the polymer clay out, it was time to try and sand this and to make the little notches flat. We have got a little bit of polymer clay that has floated round to that end. How that's happened, I do not know. But before we go on to sanding this box, it's time to demould these little spheres. So this is going to be the snowman, and these are relatively easy to demould if you just grab your fingers and push from the bottom. Now, because we turned this mould inside out, we have got the flat base, but you're not going to see that, so the bump in the bottom doesn't matter, and we've got a flat base here. So because this is like an off-white colour, I did in fact paint this with normal acrylic paint. So I'm only showing you the first coat, but I did give this 5 or 6 coat of the paint. But I didn't want to bore you silly by showing you that. But this is how it's going to go together. At the minute it doesn't look much like a snowman, but trust the process, because it is kind of cute when I'm finished. At this point I'm not sealing it, I'm not doing anything else to it, I'm just using normal white acrylic paint. This was, I think, £3 a bottle. I managed to get this on offer from the works, and I'm just painting all the way around both the pieces. Like I say, I did give this a good 5, 6, 7 coats. So while I was waiting for this to dry, it was time to try and trim these bits up and sand them. Now, like I say, at this point I still was unsure whether I was going to use this piece, So I am just trying to snip off the edges. For this I'm using just a pair of wire snips because I find that's easier at this stage. You don't want to be using a deburring tool because it's still quite soft and that will just scratch the edges rather than cut them. And this is how the snowman's going to go in. So I was unsure again whether I was going to put it this way or whether I was going to pop it in this way but use the box from the other side and try and build up the background that way. In the end, I decided that this is the way that I was going to put it. So to try and get rid of the notches on this box, I'm using a 240 grit, and these are sanding pads that come in a box of about 70. They are absolutely fantastic and so easy to use. And they start off at about a 120 grit, and they go all the way up to a 5000 grit. I will try and link them in the description below, along with everything else that I'm using today. So now on to decorating the snowman. Now these are fully coated and you can see it is a bright, bright white. So I need to glue the head onto the body. So for this I'm using 2-part epoxy glue, and I'm just mixing part A and part B together. And once it's fully combined, I'm then popping it onto the 2 bases and then waiting for them to fully dry. You don't need a lamp or anything for this. This will just dry naturally on its own, but I find it's one of the best forms of super glue on the market. Again, I will drop the link in the description below. So it is out of shot, but I have popped a little snowman hat onto this piece. I had a bag of miniature bits from Temu, and these are little scarves from a scarves and a hat set that I had. Then I'm going to make the buttons, the eyes, the nose and the mouth out of black polymer clay and some orange polymer clay for his nose. Again, I've just sped this bit up for you because I am making 4 buttons and then I'm making 2 eyes, and I wished I'd have done him a little mouth, but we're going to draw that on afterwards. So after I'd made these pieces, I then popped them into the air fryer. It's not the one we use for cooking, it's a spare one, but yeah, these take about 4 or 5 minutes in the air fryer to go hard, and then I'm just using the B7000 super glue just to stick them onto the front of this little snowman. So now it's time to decorate the box. So I'm using some glass paint that Steph from Highland Crafts kindly gifted me from my Amazon wish list. And I'm going in with a blue for the sky and then white for the snow on the bottom. I then go in with some black and some green to try and create the look of some trees. And then I use the end of my paintbrush to just pop some little white dots in to make it look like it's snowing. Now these glass paints go really, really well onto resin, and I think it just finishes it off lovely. Now for the snow effect, I'm using little polystyrene bits that I'm just scrunching up. This is in fact packaging from my baubles that I've just scrunched up into little tiny balls. So I'm using that for the snow. Now it's time to fit the snowman into the box. So again, I'm using the epoxy glue. I do in fact use some UV resin later on, mixing up equal amounts of both and then putting it all over the base of this snowman. So once it's fully combined, you can tell when it's ready because you can see here it becomes really quite thick and stringy. So I'm just gathering it up onto the end of these tweezers and then just spreading it all over the bottom. Now it was a bit daft to do it all because after realising that only half of the snowman's only going to fit in the box, yeah, most of this glue went to waste. So I'm just holding the snowman in place where I want it and then tilting it up just to make sure that it glues and sticks to the bottom. Like I said, I wasn't quite sure whether this was going to hold completely, so I did use a little bit more glue and stuck it to the back of his head because the back is in fact touching the back wall of this box. And then I'm using some UV resin just to pop all along the bottom around the edge of the snowman. 1, to hold the snowman in place, and 2, to put all these little balls as extra snow all around the side of him and all on the edge of the front of this box, just to give it that little finishing touch. When this is fully dry, I will pop some hangings onto the back of this box so that you can use it as a wall hanging. But I really, really like it. Let me know in the comments what you think. So we are nearly finished. I'm just popping the little finishing touches onto it. And this is what it's looking like so far. I wasn't quite happy with the notches on the side, so I do in fact take my little drill and screwdriver and just take off all the edges. I have sped this bit up for you because this took about 5 or 6 minutes just to sand all this down. So you can see here I'm just guiding it with my thumb and just making sure that it's completely flat, or as flat as I can make it. These little tools are really handy. I think this one was less than £15 and I've had it about 2 years. It is on its way out at the minute, so I do need another one. I know everybody's thinking, why has she waited till it's all nearly completed before she starts sanding it? But that's just the way my brain works. So yeah, I did make things a little bit more difficult for myself, but after giving it a good clean, I'm really happy with the way this has come out. So we are now finished, and all that's left is for me to leave you with some glamour pictures. I've been Tony from Georgie's Gorgeous Gifts. Stay safe, happy crafting, and bye for now.
Finger stuck all night. Tape on the table in the fairy light. Silicone mold like a midnight lake. I drop one snowflake just to watch it break. Are you there on the couch in your